Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Stay Connected podcast. Today, we're joined by Greg Robbins, and he is going to be talking about his career in the strength and conditioning world, some of the experiences that he's learned throughout it, and things that he's excited to push forwards in this world in the future. Thanks for joining us, Greg.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. Been following what you guys do online. Known Ben for a little bit now, so yeah, awesome opportunity, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. We just want to start off. You could introduce yourself a little bit for those that aren't aware, obviously, with the Strength House now, but yeah, what's kind of been your path to getting here?
Yeah, I mean, all I've ever done career-wise is coach or be a trainer. So I started off like, luckily, there's a low barrier to entry to become a trainer because probably wouldn't have made a career in this, but that wasn't the case. So I was just like commercial gym personal trainer at first. Did that for like 3 years. While I was doing that, found a gym kind of ahead of its time. Now there's like powerlifting and strongman type gyms like on every corner, it feels like, but this was like one of the OG places like that before those sports were super popular. And I kind of started sticking my head in there, got into that, and ended up with like an internship there that ended in a job. So I started really, I was learning when I was a commercial personal trainer, but really my learning probably started then, like in what I would call like real training. And a few, not even maybe 1 year into that, I was fortunate to get a job at Cressy Performance, and I was there for like 6 years, just about, I think. And then after my time there, decided that I wanted to do my own thing. So another fellow coach who I worked with there and I started the Strength House, and we've been going as the Strength House for seven years, I think. I don't know, somewhere around there. We kind of did a combination of like powerlifting and adult general fitness, and then athletes. And as we like kept going there, I was doing more of the athletes. He was gravitated more towards the powerlifting and adult side of things. Came down during that era, during that stretch, kind of changed the way we were doing things. And as we came back from that, we had the opportunity to open, like a satellite facility at a baseball facility here in Massachusetts with Northeast Baseball, which is one of the more successful club baseball programs in New England, if not like the most successful one. And so kind of like our leases were up, and so we decided to just kind of split the business where he did all the adult and powerlifting stuff. Kind of stayed closer to the neighborhood we were at there, and I just decided to go full time in what is still a very small facility. Ben's been there, but it's cool. It's like I like to call it like coolest garage gym going. We pack a lot of fun equipment and stuff into a really small space, and then we
Oh yeah,
kind of
it's intimate.
it is intimate, yes. And then we utilize like we had three tunnels. We kind of took one over for strength and conditioning stuff, but we have the baseball tunnels which we can kind of pull back depending on the hours. So we have a bunch of turf space that we can use, and it's called the barn. So it's literally a restored barn like on a farm. So we have a bunch of like open land in the back. So that's where I'm at now, and we train 98.5% baseball players, and then we have some couple other athletes kicking around. And obviously, like some of our kids are pretty young, so we get some multi-sport athletes as well, but they're generally kind of baseball first kids that are playing other sports. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's awesome.
Chase, I'm hijacking your first question because I just all right. Greg, how useful or like what do you think is the competitive advantage for you in terms of like running the strength stuff out of the not only like out of the baseball facility, but I've been there, so it's a super intimate facility. You're seeing guys not only train but also throw and hit, do whatever their like quote unquote specialty is per se. Like, how important is that to you in terms of like how it's changed how you apply training principles to guys, and then also the way you're able to actually make a difference with guys?
Yeah, I think it's huge. It's probably like two things. Probably the first thing is like when you specialize or you have like a niche as a performance coach, that gives you the opportunity to like just keep diving deeper and deeper into the demands of that sport, which I mean honestly I think any performance coach worth their weight should be doing that anyways on some level. Like there's often like I think that things have gotten better, but like in the time I've been doing it, it was a lot of coaches that were like experts at everything that was gym related, and they'd be training, you know, a baseball player and not know anything about baseball.
Right.
As far as like what is the physical demands of that, and then what's the like the skill side of that. And that's the same for like, you know, any sport that you're training. So I do have some field sport athletes, lacrosse, soccer. It seems like all the female athletes I get are obviously just baseball players, and strangely don't get a lot of softball players. So then I end up, you know, having to learn a lot about lacrosse and soccer and hockey. You know, the having a principle based approach to training makes that easier in some sense, because like I'm not really going to change the way I train athletes from like a principle standpoint. I just need to know what I'm training them for. And then once I know what I'm training them for, I'm just going to apply the principles to them as like a human, and then make sure that we're training them appropriately for like what the demands of their actual sport is.
Right.
As far as like being in the baseball facility, I mean that just makes it more convenient, I guess you could say. So like I can be coaching a bunch of kids, or guys on the strength conditioning side of things, and you know, right next to me, some of the same guys that I train are hitting or throwing, so I can stop, take a peek, just kind of see what I'm looking at. It's like it's a fine line sometimes, because you don't want to, I don't want to pretend to be like a pitching coach, because I don't consider myself a pitching coach. I don't want to pretend to be a hitting coach. I don't claim to be a pitching coach, hitting coach, but
Right.
like the better I understand those things with the like complex problems that have to be solved depending on the level of athlete or injuries and things like that, the more successful I can be. You know, especially when it comes to injury stuff. Like I've said this many times before, but like, you know, if you coach strength sports like powerlifting or something like that, or just general fitness people that their working out is their thing. It's like the end, that's the end goal. And they came in with lower back pain. The first thing that you should probably do is be like, let me see a video of you deadlift, or why don't you deadlift in front of me? Because they might be just doing some really stupid shit. And then you can be like, okay, well, before I start to poke holes in how you move and all this other stuff, let's see how this feels when you just don't deadlift like this anymore and you learn how to do it correctly. And I've found that is a huge piece of a lot of throwing related pain as well. It kind of depends on like how far it's gone, you know. So like a lot of the things probably did start as some sort of mechanical issue that caused pain, and then now we do have to work backwards a little bit more, and there's some movement based stuff that we have to address, but we're still going to have to go back and address the mechanical issue, or else it's going to come back.
Right.
Or you get them earlier on, and it's like I can sit here and work on these movement discrepancies, but at the same time, you know, my mindset has changed where like if I'm doing an evaluation, you can sit there and be like, oh wow, here's all the things that, you know, here's all these compensations and or compensatory patterns that are taking place. This isn't good. Or you can say, here's all these compensations. What are they like? What are they doing that's advantageous for this athlete? Because well, everyone, you're going to compensate. That's how you're getting the job done. Like you don't use clean relative movement to throw a baseball 95 miles an hour. So you don't necessarily want to take all of that away from them. And you know, there's we can talk about that more, but there's no like perfect answer to be like, how do you know how much? But that comes down to like the injury. Like if it's just something little that's starting to kind of flare up, look at the mechanical side, take the movement side into consideration. But you know, you don't need to necessarily overhaul this person. You might just need to fix you know, clean up a couple things and maybe give them some better strategies for managing what they're doing on the mound, so that it doesn't just keep kind of progressing in that direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the short answer to your question, I think it's the ideal setup, right? Like you'd like your skill coaches, your players, this performance staff, all be on the same page, all be in the same place and working together. I just think on the pitching side, my hand was forced a little bit because
Yeah.
you guys obviously know John, and we had John, and that was someone that I could trust and like push people towards him and communicate with him, and like not having him there or
Right.
having a pitching coach, it was like, okay, well, this is too important not to be addressed. And I know what I'm talking about a little enough to be helpful. So I'll stick my hand in there when I can. But like I tell my guys, like I'm not going to talk to you about pitch design or how to throw a slider, because I couldn't tell you a single thing about that. But when it comes to like throwing the baseball, I can help you with that.
Yeah, like the movement principles still apply, especially, well, even backing up on that. You mentioned the relative motion versus orientation thing. Just for, I don't know, people who aren't quite familiar with that, I was wondering if you could like explain the difference between relative motion and orientations, and then kind of like explain how it works in high level movement, especially something as fast and dynamic as the pitching delivery.
Like, so relative movement is simply like the ability for, you don't even have to think about the body at first, like for something to move relative to something else. So an easy example that I use a lot if I'm trying to like teach my guys this concept would be, stick an arm straight out to your side and slowly start to rotate the arm into external rotation. Like what you're going to feel is that you're going to have a certain window where you can just kind of freely rotate the arm. And then eventually you're going to feel like you're kind of hit a constraint and you sort of run out of motion. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're out of the ability to externally rotate. But what's going to happen next is going to be more of an orientation. So now the humerus is going to hit the constraint of kind of the scap, and it's going to start, for every little movement that you get now into external rotation, you got a scap that's also moving in that direction, probably a thorax. Other things they're all going to get linked together on some level. So how much relative motion do we have is not a lot. Like relative motion should be pretty close to like what your passive range of motion. Like if you laid on the ground and did a straight leg raise to yourself and you went really slow and you stopped at that point where it felt difficult or you felt any kind of sensation of a stretch, that's like about your relative motion. You might have a little bit more if I'm testing it because you're going to have muscle activity that's toned down a lot if you can stay relaxed and let me move your leg, but it'll still be close. We don't have a ton of relative motion, but it's super important because if we start linking things together right away, what does relative motion do for us? It disperses force, like it dampens force and spreads it out over multiple joints. And when you start linking things together, you're still going to be able to move. You're still going to be able to change shapes, which you're not getting. I'll back up on myself a little bit. There's one principle that's really important is this idea that joint position determines muscle orientation. So what I mean by that is like you're going to have muscles there is no like middle. It's not like this is eccentric, this is concentric. It all exists on a gradient. So like you're either moving, if you just imagine some sort of middle to a muscle length, if you're getting longer, or you're going to go towards an eccentric orientation of the muscle. If it's getting shorter, contracting, however you want to look at that, it's going towards concentric orientation. So to actually change the relative position of joints, that can only happen if you're getting changes in muscle behavior. That doesn't mean that you can't produce that movement. You could still flex an elbow, bend a knee, but you might not be doing that with any changes in actual muscle orientation. You're just getting changes in connective tissue behavior. And what you're going to end up getting from that, like I said, is a faster force moving through that area and a more focalized force as well to certain joints. So as far as when you're doing like a high speed, high force activity, well, the higher the force, the higher the speed, the less relative motion. Or I know probably both of you guys, in looking at the stuff you guys put out, have kind of read about the different skill acquisition stuff. And I believe in those texts, they'll call it like phase transitions or something like that. So
Chase is our local motor learning genius. So Chase would be that.
Okay. That phase transitions, is that what they call it? Yeah. Okay. That's sort of the easy way to see this in action. It's like if I told 10 people to walk slowly across the room, and they can do it like however they want. They could be like as goofy as they want. They can strut their stuff, whatever. Like you could get 10 very different representations of like walking to the other side of the room. We did that like 5 times, and each time I said, faster, go faster, go faster. By the 5th time, it would turn into like a full speed run or a sprint. And while there might be some differences, obviously, in everybody's sprint mechanics to some degree, what you're going to see is 10 people doing pretty much the same thing. Okay? It's all going to look like sprinting. And that's because you start to, a lot of those texts will talk about, like you start having to freeze degrees of freedom, basically. So you have to start linking things together because that's the only way that you're going to produce that much force. And so where does relative movement come into play in something like throwing a baseball? It would be like when we look at throwing a baseball, the entire throw is not a high force situation. The impulse force with time is sort of the key when it comes to something like throwing a baseball. And so like if you have no relative motion, then you're going to be forced to link things together and use orientations very early on in that delivery, and that's gonna make you have to twist and bend harder to reach some of those shapes and positions that you're eventually going to have to get into when you throw the baseball. So I kind of look at it like if you're fishing and you throw your line in, you don't want to throw a line in the water that has zero slack in it. If the line's already really tight and a big fish comes and takes a pull on that thing, there's a good chance you're going to snap the line. So you want to have a little slack in your line while it's sitting there in the water, because you're going to want that moment of it grabbing and not necessarily ripping at the line right away. And then you can turn that on and reel that thing in. That can make a big difference in like how much, again, it's not about not compensating. It's about how much are you compensating and when are you compensating. That, again, there's no perfect answer for that. Like, oh, that's too much ER compensation, like ER orientation. You just know when it doesn't work, basically, or it stops working, right? Like, okay, that's too much. There's some ways to locate it in testing movement, as far as like, that orientation is gonna start somewhere and then make its way further and further out. And there's pretty good signs of like, okay, it's generally not good when it's made it this far out, let's say. But again, it's like just how much compensation and at what time is that happening. And if you don't have some relative motion, you're going to set yourself up bigger and bigger orientations and the needing to twist and to bend stuff. And the last thing that's going to do for you that might not be advantageous, and this depends on your role, in my opinion, is that it's not as efficient. If you're a closer, like think about most of the closers, short relievers that you come across. When you look at their build and you look at the way they throw, you're going to tend to see, in general, like bigger, stiffer dudes that throw really hard, but they're not ever going to be out there for, so they are twisting and bending stuff a lot more. And they're using that to their advantage to throw really hard, but it's not efficient. So they're not going to be able to do that and repeat that over and over and over again over the course of, 60 to 80 pitches. They're good for like 10 to 20 pitches, maybe. You don't want a guy who doesn't need to be that inefficient being inefficient because of, the position they've put themselves in training and movement wise, because again, they either won't last or they won't be able to fill the description of what their role is supposed to be.
I think so. Something you talked about there is like someone comes into your gym and kind of doing an assessment on them. I think the way that you talk about assessments is different than what you hear in a lot of places where, just put someone on a table, see how much IR they have in their shoulder, see how much ER they have in their hip, maybe then make them do a squat pattern, and there you go. But you talked a little bit more about seeing how their body affects the way they move in the context of their sport. So can you dive into like someone comes into your gym, they're new, you haven't seen them before, like how do you assess them? How do you kind of bucket them and decide on programming?
It's a big question. I'll try to unpack it. Like so much of what we've already talked about already, and what we do is based off of Bill Hartman's model. Like I've never had an original thought in my life, I don't think, and learning his model has really changed my whole perspective on how I look at everything, which has been great. And I can't say enough good things about what I've learned from him and continue to learn from him. So with that being said, one of the first things that we're going to do is try to figure out what's this person's archetype and what's their configuration. So what I mean by that, with archetypes, and you guys are familiar with this, and maybe some of the listeners too, you've heard about wide and narrow archetypes. Some people say like wide and narrow ISAs. I don't like to call them wide and narrow ISAs because it's not, it only partially has to do with the angle that their rib cage creates. It's much deeper than that. We need to figure out if they're wide or narrow, because that helps us understand their structural bias, and everybody has one. Everybody is either a wide or a narrow. Once again, this exists on a gradient. Like there's only one widest wide in the world and one narrowest narrow in the world, and then everyone else is falling somewhere on that continuum. But there's nobody in the middle that's a both. So you can be a wide that's not super wide. You can be a narrow that's not super narrow, let's say. We could talk a long time about what that means. I'll try to sum it up in the easiest context is like if I'm like teaching this to our interns, the way I'll go about it is like start to put things in buckets so they can understand it a little better. And again, this is not perfect. This is like general way of looking at it. But in one bucket, you're going to have external rotation as a movement. So like any movement away from the midline of the body is going to be considered an external rotation to us. So, we know like shoulder external rotation, but abduction is external rotation. Flexion is external rotation. Anything that's moving you away from midline is external rotation. That goes in one bucket. In the other bucket is internal rotation. So internal rotation can be any movement that's towards midline. Figure that one out. But in the external rotation bucket is also going to go this idea of expansion. So anything that moves as a universal principle has to do so on a gradient. So many things work on a expansion and compression gradient. So things will move towards expansion and away from compression. So if I compress one area, I'm going to cause a subsequent expansion in the other direction, basically. So the same is true when you look at like fluid. It will move from high volumes to low volumes. You look at pressure, all these things, they move on a gradient. And that's essentially like how all the movement in the body works. So external rotation, as you can see, this is moving away from midline. So things are getting bigger, they're expanding. In the other bucket with the internal rotation is going to go compression. So anything that's kind of squeezing you back towards midline, making you smaller, that's compression. Go back to the ER bucket, you're going to put velocity in that bucket. So velocity at its highest rates are going to be expressed in external rotation. Force is going to go in the IR bucket. So the higher the force, you're going to need more compression, more squeezing. But as you can look at any force, velocity curve type thing and see that those share an inverse relationship. Like if you have a lot of force, it's not going to be fast. You have a lot of velocity, you're not going to have a lot of force represented at that time. In the external rotation bucket, I'm going to put like the idea of raising a center of gravity up, unweighting, like things that are basically not down, which is going in the IR bucket, so those are going to go into two separate buckets too. Let's see if I'm forgetting any of the main ones there. That should get us going. So you have these like two different buckets, right? And so your wide archetypes are going to gravitate more towards that IR bucket and all the things that go with it. And the narrow archetypes are going to gravitate more towards that ER bucket and all the things that go with that. And so that's important to figure out what that archetype is. You're about to do an assessment that is, really an N=1 type thing. Like everybody is different and there is no set number that we're looking for if we're looking at like, our basic table measurements. It's not like, okay, you have 15 degrees of hip internal rotation. Well, that really needs to get to 25 or else you're in big trouble. That's just not how it works. Like it's idiosyncratic. So that being said, like I need a model like Bill's to basically make better guesses because that's all that we can do. Like we don't know. There's lots that we don't know. So what we need is a representative model that helps us make better educated guesses so that we're making decisions that are better, out the gate. Are they always right? No. Like that's why you have to test and retest and get to know your athletes and just kind of keep going. But getting their archetype down, excuse me, helps me understand like what are the possibilities here. If I have a wide archetype, am I going to expect a lot of external rotation? Probably not. Like how much? I don't know. But I know that it's not going to be like as big as a narrow would be, and I'm not going to expect a lot of internal rotation. So that's like one of the primary things. The first things I'm going to do is, and then I'm going to look at their configuration. So whether you're wide or a narrow, you could meet any of these configurations. The main thing we're looking at there is like, what is the general shape of this person? Mainly by looking at like, what is the circumference of like the base of their rib cage, if you want to think of that as like one circle, and then what is this like circumference area of like, so when you look at some of what we kind of gravitate towards is like the ideal athletic build, think of someone like a LeBron James or something like that. You have that V shape to them. Okay, so we call that like a funnel. They're wider up top, they're narrower down at the hips. If we have that funnel configuration, that is going to really lend itself well to a pressure gradient that moves things out of the bottom and back up to the top. Right? We have a higher pressure situation down low. We have a lower pressure situation up top. I'm going to be able to elevate things like the guts and get pressure upwards. So those guys and girls are going to be your fastest people, your highest jumpers. Then you'll get the opposite of that, which I like to just call pairs. High pressure situation up top, low pressure situation down low. That's unfortunate if you want to be a really good athlete. I'm not saying you can't do it, and baseball might be one of those sports where you do see it happen just because it's like the skill, such the high skill part of what makes a baseball player really good. The more pair like you are, harder it is for you to leave the ground. And so you're not going to be the fastest guy on the team. You're not going to be the highest jumper on the team. And then you have like kind of more of just like your straight up like tube type build where it's more even. Could go either way, but basically like you weren't gifted with that funnel representation, but at least you're not a pair. And so you want to keep that in mind because all of these things should factor into, again, what your expectations are from a movement standpoint. They're going to factor in to how we got to where we are in space at this moment. It's not the same path for a narrow as it is for a wide. They can end up in the same place, but they didn't get there the same way. So I need to understand that so that I can reverse engineer that. I think I already said from like training considerations wise, but we can go deeper into that. But so we get the archetype, we get the configuration, and then I'll usually start with some static posture pictures. At this point, I feel like I can take a lot away from static posture picture. Obviously, it's just like this one moment in time, but it does leave a lot of clues. And I'm not going to, when I don't have to, I'm not just going to go off of just a static posture picture. But there's a lot of times where I could look at a static posture picture and then predict a lot of what I'm going to see after that. And maybe that's just my bias getting in the way, but try to be pretty consistent with the way I measure things. And then obviously taking videos of different movements, these things start to show up. So get the static posture pictures, then we'll put them on a table, ranges of motion. I do a lot of probably what are similar tests to anybody. I'm not on the table very long. I'm not doing like 50 different ranges of motion tests. I'll do what I feel like I need to do. And then sometimes if I'm stuck or need a little more information, I might do a little bit more. Sometimes I do a little bit less because I'm just like, it's not really that needed at this point. I kind of understand where we have to start. But I think the big thing there is like, again, I'm not looking at those tests as if like, okay, I'm taking an external rotation measurement of your shoulder. Well, there's no way that I'm just measuring your shoulder. Like I'm measuring, this is a systemic thing. So like I'm looking at way more than a shoulder when I bring it back into external. Sure, I'm doing my best to keep it as much like just trying to get relative motion as possible, but it would be impossible for me on some level to know how much cervical rotation I'm getting, or when they laid down on the table, like did that reposition them in such a way that is going to exaggerate some numbers and decrease some other numbers. There's other ways that we can figure that out, but I'm getting a baseline idea of what the possibilities are in terms of how they can move. And then, at this point, even though I didn't look at it through this lens all these years, I've still been doing table tests on baseball players for 14 years. So the feel of it all is very important to me. Like I'll write the numbers down, but they're not like an end all to be all for me. I could get the same number coming back with the same athlete with completely different end feels, noticing like different little, was it easier even just to bring their arm up into this position? Was there less compensation to even get the arm in this position? These are all things that I can't necessarily put into like a sheet of paper that says this is how you do an assessment. They're just gained via experience over time. And then I just kind of mess around with them a lot when they're on the table too. Like I don't stick to just, 90-degree straight plane measurements. I'm going to move them on like what I perceive as like their helical angle. I'm just going to move that thing around a bunch. Like, I just want to get this idea of like, okay, I kind of stick this thing over here. What happens? What goes with it? Like, I'll do that with pretty much every measurement. I think that's how you get better at measuring too, is like understanding when to pull a measurement. Like that's very hard to understand when to pull a measurement. It's much easier if you just keep going and then see what happens. Like, you do a straight leg raise and you keep going and you watch a leg on the other side turn out, or you watch a hip come off the table, or you watch their body just roll away from you to the other side. And then you can obviously just kind of like, okay, let me bring it back to where before all of that stuff started happening. Okay, that's a better representation of what I'm looking for from a relative motion standpoint. Because, the original way I got trained to take things like shoulder measurements were like, put them in external rotation and crank that son of a bitch back as far as it'll go and see like, so I'm measuring like shoulder ERs at like 150 degrees, which is like, that's impossible. Like you don't get a shoulder. Hopefully you don't get a shoulder that's rotating 150 degrees. Is it worth like seeing? Yeah. Like does a pitcher have to get their arm like to 180 degrees? Ideally, it's probably going to have to go back that far, but it's not coming from the shoulder alone. At that point, there's a lot of other contributing factors to getting all of that layback. So after we do the table test, we'll do some pretty standard video stuff like body weight squats, split squats, toe touches, standing rotation. We'll do something called like a load propulsion test, which is basically just facing a wall, feet together, kind of having the fingertip on the wall but not supporting yourself, and then raising a knee and just kind of seeing how they have to move to get a knee up to parallel or further. So those will be like my go-tos. For throwers, I'll do some more stuff with their arms, wrists, and hand, like so elbows, wrists, and hands, elbow flexion in a couple different positions. I'll do some stuff with their tests with their hands to figure out if there's like a excessive rotation going on in the forearm. Is there excessive rotation going on the hand relative to the forearm? And then after that, it's cliche, but it's true. Like everything's an assessment. So, just start watch them walk around, watch them do stuff. And then obviously, if I'm working with a guy who's, I don't know, if it's like 12 or 13-year-old kid, I'm not necessarily demanding that I see his pitching mechanics videos. But if it's one of our higher level high school arms, college, pro, like I want to see them throw. I want to see them swing. So if I'm not going to see that in person that day, then I want to see video of it. And honestly, I also think that's really key because like the stuff we're doing is different. Obviously, some of them haven't been exposed to a lot of other stuff, but they've all been exposed to something, but via social media or something at this point to what they think training is or what it should be. So the more I can relate that back to the thing that they actually want to improve on, the better. So if I have that opportunity in the evaluation, then I'm going to link it all together. Usually to get a little bit more buy-in, I can go through all of the movement stuff and then start talking to them like, this could lead to this happening in your throw or this happening in your swing, or you might struggle with this. And a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, that does happen in this, does happen in my throw. And then we'll look at the video and I'll be like, okay, yeah, see this, here it is here. Just so they're kind of like, okay, this is sort of like a principled thing. Like I didn't actually even have to see you throw to kind of understand that you probably are going to lean towards this strategy when you're throwing a baseball or something like that.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I like the way that you talked about it being holistic, right? Like as you gain experience, I think that's an underrated piece of training and coaching in general, right? Like your reps in the field help to inform the future, right? It's not all just from a textbook, but you're going to learn from actually interacting with the athletes in the space. Something else that I think is related to that is keeping what I'd say like keeping the main thing, right? So it's not just about is their movement quality, quote unquote, getting better, but like are they actually getting better on the field? So I think you've spoken about like KPIs being pitching velocity rather than how much are you squatting. Like why is that so important to you to keep the assess or the KPIs more relevant to the person's sport rather than just numbers that you'll see in the gym as a trainer?
Mainly because when it comes to baseball, you're not going to see a lot of correlation between things that you test in the gym and performance on the field. Like I know we can all go find them if we want to find them. Like, oh, this dude has a 30-inch vertical jump on force plates and he throws 98. I guarantee you, if you go and do that with 50 other guys that throw 98, you won't see the majority jumping 30 inches on force plates. And that's probably also because the general selection process for doing something like throwing a baseball 98 doesn't line up super well with the selection process for jumping 30 inches. Who are in general your guys that like gravitate towards throwing baseballs really hard? In my experience, they're pretty like tall, long guys. Not always, but you see a tall, long guy with the propensity to move quickly, and that have a good chance of throwing a baseball pretty hard if they can get the timing and the skill of it all down. But you're also not going to see a lot of 6'7", 220, 30-pound dudes jumping out of the gym. I really just through trial and error, like, do I want like gym KPIs to correlate really well with baseball performance? Yeah, that'd be great. But I just haven't found many of them. Tried lots of things. Like, obviously, like, we still jump, which we can get to. Like, we still get these performance KPIs. They're not useful, but they don't have a direct correlation, in my opinion, to pitching, something like pitching velocity. We've tried throwing med balls for different velocities. That didn't correlate at all. We've tried, obviously everyone's done strength numbers. You're not going to see a perfect correlation there either. It's not that we don't look at those things. They can be important, but ultimate KPI for something baseball related, in my opinion, is the baseball thing. Like, is your pitching velocity, like, it has to be there. If it's, it's not like you're training an offensive lineman in football. I don't know what the performance KPI would be for an offensive lineman in football. Like, maybe I just don't know football well enough, but like, I don't know how you put a number on it and like remove to some degree the skill side of it, considering that there is an opponent that they're doing this thing against, right? So when you look at something like throwing a baseball from a velocity standpoint, there's no opponent, right? Like, it's just you and the task, and you're throwing a baseball as hard as you can. With the offensive lineman, I could say, like, well, for sure, like, you're ultimately going to have to move a dude that's 350 pounds. So being able to bench press at 350 pounds might be a solid idea. You're going to have to be able to withstand a 350 pound dude running into you and then hold your ground. So maybe squatting 600 pounds is a good KPI for making sure that you're prepared for what you have to do on the field. And, lo and behold, you probably go into the NFL and take all those offensive linemen, and you'll see you're not going to like randomly find this offensive lineman that can only bench 225, right? That's not going to happen. But I'm sure you can walk into plenty of clubhouses and see a guy that throws 95 who can't bench press 225. There's a lot of that when it comes to something like baseball. So you have to keep those KPIs more related to the sport. If in my opinion, if you want get an accurate idea of what you're doing is working.
Yeah.
If that answer the question.
Yeah. I think like I don't know. I mean, there's still plenty of people doing it. I feel like we all done it where it's like usually comes from like a heart of wanting guys to get better, and so if you're the gym guy, if you're the strength guy, like, you're not the pitching guy per se, you want to do all that you can to help these guys get better. And for a while, it's just like, oh, let's just load them up with 10 and just get them strong. But like, there's a ton of consequences that come with that as well, especially in something as like dynamic and as pitching. So with that being said, like, what do you think is your biggest regret in terms of how you've approached training baseball players in the past, and how has that almost changed how you train them now and where you want to go moving forward? I'll use that as like our last question to wrap up.
Okay. Yeah. I think probably every strength coach, and I've certainly have been guilty of, being the strength forward strength coach, obviously appreciated trade-offs as well as I do now. That being said, like, I don't think I was ever like a complete dumbass either, where I felt like I was hurting guys in the gym either, right? Like, so, how we lifted those heavy weights was important. And so, like, can that have a role in somebody like getting hurt? Yeah. I mean, a lot of things could have a role in a guy getting hurt. But at the same token, like, there's plenty of people that had success. Like, there's a couple guys who I still train today, are either playing, a high level of college baseball or professional baseball, that I literally coached since they were like 13 years old. And so, like, that's pretty cool. And then that's also like, it's kind of funny because I can like joke with them and we can look back. Oh, we do things a lot different than we used to. At the same time, you were a skinny 13-year-old and now you're a professional baseball player. So, like, it didn't all suck, right? Like, some of it was helpful. My biggest regret, as far as like, I guess I wish I put more time into what we talked about earlier. Like, the moment I trained a baseball pitcher, I should have understood baseball pitching better. Like, I should have broken that down to a first principles level and been like, what are the physics of this? What are the shapes that they have to get into? How does this whole thing work? Like what is making, not training aside, like what is making the most successful pitchers so successful, and what is making, and why aren't other guys not as successful? And I think if I had done that, it would have led me to, I would have been asking better questions, and it would have led me down more useful avenues sooner. Like I think it's more, I would approach that question more from that angle than like, oh, I regret lifting them heavy. Like I said, if I was just lifting them heavy with no care at all about how we were lifting those weights, or like, managing things like workloads and stuff like that, like that would be regretful. Like I know how to lift heavy. I know how to do that correctly. Like, there's time and a place for it for most people, necessarily the right thing for every guy at the time I saw certain guys. We went after that adaptation, and we went after that adaptation the right way.
Right.
In that sense, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. No, I want to clarify. I am definitely not the anti lifting guy by any means.
No, we know that. Yeah. and either am I. Like, it's a complex question because it's like it goes to trade-offs, and at some point you're gonna have all these different guys that are on the spectrum, as far as like, yeah, you have some that were, again, like kind of genetically selected to be really good at throwing a baseball. Like that's why we all end up in any sport we end up in. It's like you have to have some predisposition to play that sport. Like I was never going to play basketball. It wasn't going to happen. Like even my position in baseball as a catcher, like that's pretty self-selected. That's pretty much the only place, except for maybe third base, that you're going to stick a guy like me. So like we all get selected, but now we're, at the same time, there's like how many high schools, how many colleges, how many opportunities to be a pitcher. There's more of them opportunities to be a pitcher than there are guys that are like born to be pitchers, right? So you're going to have these athletes who want to play college baseball, and maybe they're not going to play college baseball at like a Power 5 type program, but they really want to play Division I baseball, and they're like a cusp guy. Well, it's like, okay, let's be a little more aggressive. There's going to be a trade-off here, but this is what you need basically to take that next step. Because we're asking you to do something that you're not necessarily like made to do, but you really want to do it. We can milk your strengths for everything that they possibly could be. And with that will come some trade-offs. As a coach, once you understand that, you also can have much better real conversations with your athletes and be like, okay, this is what I'm thinking that we'll have to do. This is the possibilities of like what the trade-offs are. Is that what you want to do? It's not my body, it's your body. Like, is that what you want to do? If they're like, hell yeah, let's do it, then let's do it. We push something like horse production a little bit harder, but if we're being honest, the reason most strength coaches gravitate towards adaptations in strength is because it's the easiest adaptation to get. Like if you can understand a few basic principles like specificity and progressive overload, and you can get an athlete to show up consistently, then getting stronger should be as easy as throwing a ball off a boat and hitting water. Like it's not hard to do to get somebody stronger. It's really easy to keep track of. It's really easy to show you like, hey, you could only deadlift 200 pounds. Now you can deadlift 400 pounds. I think that, that's why you have that. They're just not as at creating other adaptations because they're more complex. Like things like power, things like getting people to move aren't as straightforward, are going to be different in a lot of ways for different guys. And so they take more work. And then on some level, they're like harder to hand them a piece of paper and be like, here's the progress that you made in this. But they're hugely important because I can say that about that cusp kid that wants to play D1, but there are instances where that cusp player, the real thing that would bring them from mid 80s to throwing 90 isn't more force production. It's moving more efficiently or having, a better impulse time, like being able to create force in a shorter time window. So I'm not saying that's always the thing that we'd have to go off. But if you don't have confidence in, as a coach, in being able to create that adaptation, then you're probably not going to do it. You're going to go with what you know how to do.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it's a great place to leave it, especially for us as like more on the on-field coaching side more directly, right? Like thinking how we can collaborate and combine to reach those KPIs, I think is super, super important. And it's great and honestly refreshing to hear, someone with your experience and knowledge being able to like translate some of these concepts that people can work together towards that goal of, hey, maybe it is moving more efficiently rather than just a strength gain, or maybe it's the other way around. It's a strength gain or moving faster rather than moving more efficiently, whatever it may be. But can you tell us where to find you, whether it's on Instagram, social media, where people can stuff?
Sorry. My personal Instagram is Greg_Robbins_TSH. There's not really much training information on there, but lots of pictures of my daughters. And then our gym is at the Strength House. And I'm not super active on there, but maybe one day I'll be more active. But we do push stuff up. But that is probably the place to go to kind of link to anything else that we might do in the future. And then we have a website, thestrengthhouse.com. There's a couple blog posts on there, but mainly I just like write blog posts. But you probably tell from talking to me, I just write blog posts that are way too wordy and just ramble on forever. And I show them to someone and be like, I'm thinking about putting this up as a blog post. And then one of my coaches would be like, yeah, no one's going to read that. Or understand what you're talking about. So then it just sits on my computer in the notes section. But there's a couple that made it on there before I decided to ask someone's opinion on whether I should keep posting these things or not. And yeah, but you can reach out. Like, I do my best to answer questions if people reach out on either of those pages if you have questions about that stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you again, Greg, for talking with us. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys next week on next episode of Staying Connected.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.